The German bullet missed Dmitry Volkov's head by 3 centimeters at 0612 hours on September 14, 1942, close enough that he felt the heat across his left ear and heard the supersonic crack split the frozen Stalingrad air like a whip. Volkov dropped flat behind the rubble pile, heart hammering, hands shaking so hard he nearly dropped the 1.2-ounce paperclip he'd been holding, a bent piece of steel wire salvaged from a bombed-out administrative building, twisted at precise angles, using nothing but his fingers and 8 years of factory floor experience bending metal in a Moscow automobile plant. The sniper was somewhere in the destroyed grain elevator 400 meters northeast, and he'd already killed 7 Soviet soldiers this morning, picking them off one by one as they tried to move supplies across the Volga crossing point. Volkov was supposed to be carrying ammunition boxes, not hunting snipers. He was a factory worker conscripted 6 weeks ago, given a Mosin-Nagant rifle and 12 bullets, and told to defend the motherland. He didn't know how to be a soldier, but he knew metal, and that paperclip in his trembling hands was about to kill more Germans than an entire rifle company. The blood was still warm on the ground where Private Sokolov died 2 minutes ago. Volkov could smell it mixing with the cordite stink and brick dust that filled Stalingrad's ruins like fog. Sokolov had been 19 years old, from somewhere in the Urals, and the German sniper put a 7.92mm Mauser round through his forehead at a range Volkov estimated was at least 420 meters, based on the angle and impact. 7 men dead in 97 minutes, all headshots, all from positions where Soviet soldiers thought they had cover. The German sniper was good, probably trained at one of those Wehrmacht sniper schools in Poland or Czechoslovakia, probably had months or years of combat experience, probably had a scope-mounted Kar 98K with a 4-AUR Zeiss optic that cost more than Volkov earned in a year at the automobile factory. What the German sniper didn't have was experience with factory workers who understood spring tension and mechanical advantage, who'd spent 8 years bending sheet metal and wire into precise shapes, who could look at a paperclip and see not office supplies, but a weapon. Volkov's hands stopped shaking as he focused on the paperclip, muscle memory taking over from fear. The clip was standard Soviet issue, 33 millimeters long, 1.2 millimeters thick, made from low-carbon steel wire that was soft enough to bend but springy enough to hold shape. Volkov had already bent it into a specific configuration. One end formed into a small hook, the other end twisted into a loop, the middle section bent at a 47-degree angle that he'd calculated by eye based on years of factory work. The shape looked random, useless, like garbage you'd find in rubble. But Volkov knew what it really was: a trigger extension. He worked quickly, fingers moving with practiced precision, wiring the paperclip to his Mosin-Nagant's trigger guard using copper wire stripped from destroyed telephone cables. The installation took 48 seconds. When he finished, his rifle had something no other Soviet weapon in Stalingrad possessed: the ability to be fired remotely from 7 meters away. The physics were beautifully simple, the kind of problem that would have made his factory foreman nod in approval. Pull the paperclip's loop, tension travels through the bent wire, force transfers to the hook attached to the trigger, trigger pulls, rifle fires. Basic mechanical advantage using leverage and spring tension, the same principles that governed every assembly line tool Volkov had ever operated. But the application, that was innovation born from desperation. Soviet snipers were dying at horrific rates in Stalingrad because German counter-snipers could pinpoint muzzle flash, could calculate position from a single shot, could put return fire on target within seconds. Standard Soviet doctrine was to shoot and immediately relocate, but immediately wasn't fast enough when German snipers had better optics and better training. Men died in their firing positions, killed by return fire before they could move. Volkov's paperclip solved that problem with crude elegance. Shoot from 7 meters away, control the rifle remotely, and when the German sniper's return fire comes, you're not where he thinks you are. Volkov positioned his Mosin Nagant in the rubble pile, aimed it carefully toward the grain elevator using a notched stick to hold the barrel steady, and unreeled 7 meters of the copper wire that connected to his paperclip trigger. He moved to a different position, behind a collapsed wall section that gave him cover from the German sniper's line of sight, and crouched there with the wire in his hands, breathing hard, tasting copper fear in his mouth. This was either brilliant or suicidal. The German sniper would see the rifle muzzle when it fired, would put return fire on that position within 3 seconds according to Volkov's estimate, would expect to hit the Soviet shooter. Instead, he'd hit an empty rifle position while Volkov was 7 meters away, safe behind cover, already relocating to a new firing position. In theory. Volkov's entire military career consisted of 6 weeks of chaotic urban combat, where he'd fired maybe 200 rounds total and killed exactly 0 Germans as far as he knew. His factory career consisted of 8 years bending metal. He was about to find out if factory skills translated to combat. He pulled the wire. 7 meters away, the paperclip transferred tension to the trigger. The Mosin Nagant fired with that distinctive crack that every soldier in Stalingrad knew by heart, and Volkov watched his bullet hit the grain elevator's 3rd-floor window, where he'd calculated the German sniper was positioned. He didn't know if he'd hit the sniper. Probably not. This was his first shot, and the range was over 400 meters, but he didn't need to hit him. He needed to draw return fire. 3 seconds. That's how long Volkov counted before the German sniper's response came. 2 rapid shots that hit the rubble pile where Volkov's rifle sat, bullets smacking into brick and mortar with sharp cracks that meant the German was firing 7.92 mm from a high-velocity rifle. Both shots missed because there was nobody behind the rifle. Volkov was 7 meters away, already pulling his rifle back by the wire, relocating to a new position 40 meters south. The German sniper had just given away his exact location by shooting at a decoy, and Volkov now knew precisely where to aim. The second shot came from the new position at 06:21 hours, 9 minutes after the first German bullet nearly killed Volkov. This time Volkov aimed more carefully, compensated for the 400-meter drop, led the target by estimating wind speed based on smoke patterns from burning buildings. He pulled the wire. The rifle fired. Through gaps in the rubble, Volkov saw his bullet hit the grain elevator's window frame, close, maybe 30 centimeters from where he'd aimed, but close enough to make the German sniper react. Return fire came again, 2 shots, both hitting Volkov's unmanned rifle position. The German still hadn't figured out what was happening, still thought he was dueling with a Soviet sniper operating normally. Volkov relocated again, moved to a 3rd position, set up his rifle on a different rubble pile, unreeled his wire, aimed at the grain elevator window, where he'd now seen 3 separate muzzle flashes. The German sniper was getting predictable, shooting from the same position, probably because that position offered the best view of Soviet supply routes. Predictable meant dead. The 3rd shot came at 06:27 hours, and this time Volkov's bullet found flesh. He didn't see the German sniper die. 400 meters was too far for that level of detail without optics, but he saw the Kar 98K fall from the window, watched it tumble 3 stories, and hit the ground in a puff of brick dust. No more return fire came. The grain elevator went silent. Volkov waited 5 minutes, watching for movement, seeing nothing, then carefully retrieved his rifle and examined the trigger mechanism. The paperclip was still securely attached, the copper wire intact, the whole improvised system ready for reuse. He'd just killed his first German soldier using factory worker skills and 7 meters of wire. The mathematics were starting to form in Volkov's head. If he could kill 1 German sniper from safe distance, if he could replicate this technique, if he could teach other soldiers how to do it, then maybe, just maybe, Soviet soldiers would stop dying at 7 men per 97 minutes. But first he had to survive the next 10 minutes because Senior Lieutenant Petrovich was approaching across the rubble field, looking angry in that specific way Soviet officers had when they thought someone was deviating from doctrine. Petrovich was 34 years old, a pre-war regular Army officer, and he'd been screaming at Volkov for 6 weeks about proper firing positions and approved tactics. "Private Volkov," Petrovich shouted, while still 20 meters away. "Did you just fire 3 times from 3 different positions using that cursed wire contraption?" Volkov stood at attention, rifle in hand, paperclip trigger dangling visibly from the trigger guard. "Yes, Comrade Lieutenant, the German sniper in the grain elevator is dead. I confirmed the kill by observing his rifle falling from the window." Petrovich stared at Volkov, then at the paperclip, then at the grain elevator, then back at Volkov. "You killed a German sniper at 400 meters using a rifle you weren't even holding." Volkov explained the mechanics in simple terms, factory worker language rather than military jargon. Remote trigger using leverage and wire tension, 7-meter standoff distance to avoid return fire, multiple shooting positions to confuse enemy counter-snipers. Petrovich listened with an expression that cycled through disbelief, anger, consideration, and finally something that might have been respect. When Volkov finished, Petrovich asked the only question that mattered. "Can you do it again?" Volkov looked at the paperclip, at the rubble-filled Stalingrad ruins, at the smoke from burning buildings that marked where German and Soviet forces faced each other across hundreds of meters of destroyed cityscape. "Comrade Lieutenant, I can do it as many times as you have paperclips and wire. The Germans can't shoot what they can't see." Petrovich made a decision that would either get him court-martialed or decorated. "Show me how to build one. Then we're going to teach every sniper in the 62nd Army." To understand how a 31-year-old factory worker from Moscow ended up in Stalingrad inventing remote firing mechanisms using office supplies, you need to go back to factory number 37 in 1934 and a workplace accident that taught Dmitry Volkov that tools extend human capability but also human vulnerability. Volkov was 23 years old, newly hired as a sheet metal worker, when a pneumatic press malfunctioned and crushed the hand of a worker named Anatoly, who'd been operating it normally. The press should have stopped when Anatoly pulled the trigger lever. Instead, it kept pressing, kept crushing, and by the time someone hit the emergency stop, Anatoly had lost 3 fingers and would never work factory floor again. The investigation found that the trigger lever had a worn spring that failed under repeated use. The spring should have provided immediate release when pressure was removed. Instead, there was a fractional delay, 0.3 seconds according to engineering analysis, and that delay destroyed Anatoly's hand. Volkov spent weeks thinking about that press, about mechanical delay and human reaction time, about the fundamental problem of humans physically contacting dangerous machinery. His solution was simple: extend the trigger using a mechanical linkage that allowed operation from 1 meter away. He built a prototype using wire and scrap metal, showed it to his foreman, got permission to test it. The extended trigger worked perfectly, all the press's functionality with none of the operator vulnerability. Factory number 37 implemented Volkov's design across 43 pneumatic presses by 1935, and workplace injuries from press accidents dropped by 78%. Volkov got a small bonus and a reputation as the worker who understood how to make dangerous tools safer by adding distance between operator and operation. He spent the next 7 years refining that skill, creating remote controls and extended mechanisms for everything from welding equipment to paint sprayers, always working with the same principle: distance equals safety. Then, June 22, 1941 happened. Germany invaded, the Wehrmacht raced across Soviet territory, and factory number 37 converted from automobile production to military equipment repair. Volkov spent a year fixing tanks and trucks, then got conscripted in August 1942 when the Army started drafting skilled workers to fill catastrophic personnel losses. They sent him to Stalingrad because Stalingrad needed bodies more than training, gave him a rifle that was older than he was, and told him to shoot Germans. Volkov's entire military training consisted of 2 days learning to operate a Mosin Nagant, 3 days of political lectures about defending the motherland, and 0 days of sniper training or tactical instruction. He arrived in Stalingrad on August 29, 1942, got assigned to a rifle company defending the Volga crossing points, and spent 2 weeks absolutely terrified while German artillery and Stukas destroyed the city around him. He fired his rifle 19 times in those first 2 weeks, aiming at distant figures that might have been Germans, or might have been civilians, or might have been nothing at all. He had no idea if he'd hit anything. He just shot when officers told him to shoot, took cover when officers told him to take cover, and tried desperately not to die. The paperclip idea came to him on September 13th, the day before he killed his first German, while watching a Soviet sniper named Zaitsev get wounded by counter-sniper fire. Zaitsev was famous, one of those legend snipers who'd killed dozens of Germans and had medals and newspaper articles written about him. But even Zaitsev got hit because he couldn't relocate fast enough after firing. The German return fire came within 2 seconds, hit the wall where Zaitsev had been shooting, wounded him with shrapnel even though he'd already started moving. Volkov watched medics carry Zaitsev away and thought, 2 seconds isn't enough time. You need to not be there when the return fire comes. You need distance between yourself and your rifle. That night, while huddled in a basement with his unit, Volkov found a paperclip on the floor, probably dropped by some Soviet bureaucrat before the building got bombed, and started bending it, thinking about Factory No. 37, thinking about extended triggers and mechanical advantage, thinking about how factory safety principles might apply to combat. By dawn on September 14th, he had a prototype. By 06:12 hours, a German sniper had nearly killed him. By 06:27 hours, Volkov had validated his design with enemy blood. Senior Lieutenant Petrovich organized the training session at 1400 hours on September 14th, gathering 12 Soviet snipers in a half-collapsed factory building and ordering Volkov to demonstrate the paperclip trigger. Volkov showed them the bent wire configuration, explained the installation procedure, let them examine his rifle's trigger mechanism. The snipers ranged from skeptical to hostile. These were men who'd killed dozens of Germans each, who'd survived weeks or months of urban combat, and now some factory worker was telling them to attach paperclips to their rifles and shoot using wires. A sniper named Kulikov, who'd killed 43 Germans according to unit records, said what everyone was thinking. "Comrade, I've been shooting Germans since August. I know how to use my rifle. I don't need toys from a factory." Volkov understood the resistance. He'd seen it in factories when introducing new procedures, so he made the only argument that mattered. "How many friends have you lost to counter-snipers?" Kulikov's face went hard. 8. Volkov nodded. "My system means you're not where the Germans think you are when they shoot back. 8 meters away, behind cover, alive." The demonstration happened at 14:30 hours with all 12 snipers watching. Volkov set up his rifle, aimed at a brick wall 200 meters away, unreeled his 7-meter wire, took position behind cover, and fired remotely. The rifle bucked, the bullet hit the wall exactly where aimed, and Volkov was completely protected from any hypothetical return fire. Then he handed Kulikov a second rifle that he'd modified during the morning, showed him how to attach the paperclip trigger properly, supervised while Kulikov installed his own system. Kulikov's first remote shot hit 3 meters from target. Bad accuracy, but Kulikov had been compensating for holding the rifle and wasn't used to the slight delay in the wire pull firing mechanism. His second shot hit 1 meter from target. His third shot hit the exact center. Kulikov looked at the paperclip trigger with an expression that was no longer hostile. "How many of these can you make?" Volkov had 13 paperclips collected from various bombed buildings around Stalingrad. 13, but there are hundreds of paperclips in the ruins if we look for them. And the principle works with any bendable wire, telephone wire, electrical wire, anything with the right gauge and spring tension. By 1800 hours on September 14th, all 12 snipers had paperclip triggers installed and tested. By 2100 hours, they'd scrounged 47 additional paperclips from destroyed administrative buildings across Soviet-held Stalingrad. By midnight, Petrovich had submitted a report to division headquarters describing the remote firing system and requesting authorization to distribute the modification throughout 62nd Army's sniper units. The report included Volkov's German sniper kill from that morning, Kulikov's successful training demonstration, and a tactical assessment that estimated the system could reduce Soviet sniper casualties by 30 to 50% through elimination of exposure to return fire. Division headquarters responded at 0340 hours on September 15th with orders that were simultaneously bureaucratic and revolutionary. Remote trigger system approved for field testing. Private Volkov assigned to train implementation. Submit casualty and effectiveness data weekly. The first combat test of Volkov's trained snipers came at dawn on September 15th, when 6 Soviet snipers equipped with paperclip triggers engaged German positions across the Mamayev-Kurgan ruins. The results were dramatic enough that Petrovich filed a supplementary report that afternoon. 6 Soviet snipers, 47 total shots fired, 11 confirmed German kills including 3 enemy snipers eliminated by counterfire, 0 Soviet casualties. Standard Soviet sniper operations in Stalingrad were averaging roughly 3 confirmed kills per 6 snipers per day, with average casualty rates of 0.8 snipers killed or wounded per engagement. The paperclip-equipped snipers had nearly quadrupled the kill rate while completely eliminating casualties. German counter-sniper fire hit empty positions, wasted ammunition, and failed to suppress Soviet shooters who were safely repositioned before return fire arrived. Kulikov personally killed 4 Germans that day, operating from positions where he would normally have been dead after the first shot. But the mathematics that made Petrovich excited were the ones that made Volkov nervous. 11 Germans killed in one day meant 22 in 2 days, 33 in 3 days, and the German army wasn't infinite. Eventually, they'd figure out what was happening, would adapt their tactics, would find a counter to the paperclip triggers. Volkov estimated they had maybe 2 weeks before German intelligence analyzed the new Soviet technique and developed countermeasures. 2 weeks to kill as many Germans as possible, to save as many Soviet soldiers as possible, to exploit the advantage before it disappeared. He spent September 15th training more snipers, 18 additional soldiers by nightfall, each one learning to bend paperclips and install remote triggers, and September 16th training 24 more. The system spread through Stalingrad's defenders like wildfire, sniper to sniper, unit to unit, everyone wanting the modification that let you shoot Germans without dying yourself. By September 19th, an estimated 93 Soviet snipers in Stalingrad were using paperclip triggers. By September 23rd, that number hit 147. The German response came on September 24th, and it was exactly what Volkov had feared. A captured Soviet sniper, killed by artillery, not counter-sniper fire, had a paperclip trigger attached to his rifle, and German intelligence officers figured out what it meant. Wehrmacht headquarters issued new counter-sniper protocols. Watch for unmanned rifles. Target multiple positions after detecting muzzle flash. Use suppressive fire to prevent Soviet snipers from recovering their remotely fired weapons. The German adaptation was smart, professional, exactly what Volkov would have done facing the same problem. It cut the effectiveness of the paperclip triggers by an estimated 40%, according to engagement reports from September 25th to 26th. Soviet snipers were still safer than before, still shooting from cover, still avoiding direct return fire. But the advantage was shrinking. Volkov needed an adaptation of his adaptation, needed to stay ahead of German countermeasures, needed to And then the attack came at 0447 hours on September 27th, German assault infantry hitting the Volga crossing points with flamethrowers and close assault tactics, and Dmitry Volkov found himself in a basement with 11 other Soviet soldiers, surrounded by Germans who were systematically clearing the building above them, and his paperclip trigger wouldn't help him because the Germans weren't 400 meters away in a sniper duel. They were 10 meters away with grenades and machine pistols, and Volkov was about to discover that factory worker improvisation only took you so far when the grenade bounced down the basement stairs at 0449 hours, a Model 24 steel hand granite that the Germans called a potato masher because of its distinctive wooden handle, and Volkov watched it tumble end over end in the dim light from burning buildings outside, had maybe 3 seconds to react, and his brain did something automatic. He grabbed the grenade with both hands and threw it back up the stairwell as hard as he could. The explosion came before the grenade cleared the top step, close enough that the concussion knocked Volkov backward and filled the basement with brick dust and smoke, but far enough that the shrapnel went upward into the Germans instead of downward into the Soviets. Volkov heard Germans screaming above, heard return fire from Soviet soldiers in the basement who were now shooting up the stairwell at targets they couldn't see, and his hands were shaking again, but this time not from fear, from pure adrenaline and the realization that he'd just survived something that should have killed everyone in this basement. Private Kulikov grabbed Volkov's shoulder, shouting over the gunfire, "We need to get out! They'll drop more grenades or just collapse the building on top of us." But the only exit was the stairwell, currently occupied by an unknown number of German assault troops who had flamethrowers and machine pistols and tactical superiority, and going up those stairs meant dying in the first 3 seconds. Volkov looked around the basement. 11 Soviet soldiers, 47 rounds of ammunition total, based on a quick verbal inventory, 2 Mosin Nagant rifles with paperclip triggers, and a basement that was about to become a tomb. Then he saw the ventilation shaft in the ceiling, maybe 40 centimeters square, probably leading to the ground floor, definitely too small for a man to fit through, but large enough for a rifle. And Volkov had 2 rifles with remote triggers that could fire from 7 meters away. His brain went back to factory mode, solving mechanical problems under pressure, and he said something that made Kulikov look at him like he was insane. "We're going to shoot them through the ventilation shaft, from down here, where they can't shoot back." The improvisation took 97 seconds and violated approximately every principle of proper military tactics. Volkov positioned both rifles on wooden crates stacked under the ventilation shaft, aimed them upward at angles calculated purely by geometry and guesswork, wired the paperclip triggers with the 7-meter copper wire, and took position behind a concrete support pillar while other Soviet soldiers covered the stairwell. He couldn't see the Germans through the ventilation shaft, couldn't see anything except darkness and smoke, but he could hear them moving on the floor above, hear German voices shouting orders, hear the distinctive click hiss of a flamethrower being primed. The flamethrower changed everything. If the Germans used it down the stairwell, everyone in the basement would burn. Volkov pulled the first trigger wire at 0452 hours, and his Mosin Nagant fired upward through the ventilation shaft, the bullet ricocheting off concrete and metal somewhere above, and he heard a German scream. Not a death scream, a surprise scream, the sound of someone who just realized they were taking fire from an unexpected direction. Volkov pulled the second wire. Second rifle fired. More German shouting, and now Volkov could hear them moving away from directly above the ventilation shaft. The Germans responded by throwing another grenade down the stairwell at 0453 hours, but this time Soviet soldiers were ready. 3 men with rifles aimed at the stairwell opening, firing the moment they saw German movement. The grenade landed halfway down the stairs, exploded there, and the shaped charge effect sent most of the shrapnel back up toward the Germans. More screaming. Then silence. Volkov counted to 30, heard nothing, counted to 60, still nothing. At 0455 hours, Kulikov made the decision to probe the stairwell, sent 2 soldiers up slowly, weapons ready, expecting ambush. They reached the ground floor at 0457 hours and reported back, 4 Germans dead, 2 wounded, the rest retreated. We have a clear path to the street. Volkov and his paperclip triggers had just broken a German assault by shooting at targets he couldn't see, from a position the Germans couldn't effectively attack, using factory worker improvisation that no military manual would ever approve. They evacuated the basement at 05:01 hours, carried their wounded, reached Soviet-held positions by 0534 hours, and Volkov spent the next 3 hours explaining to increasingly senior officers how he'd defended a basement using ventilation shafts and remote triggers. By noon on September 27, 1942, the story had reached General Vasily Chuikov, commander of the 62nd Army defending Stalingrad, and Chuikov was the kind of general who appreciated practical innovation over doctrine. He summoned Volkov to headquarters, a bunker on the Volga's west bank that shook constantly from German artillery, and asked 3 questions. First, how many German snipers have been killed by this paperclip system? Second, how many Soviet snipers have we saved? Third, can you scale this to the entire army? Volkov answered as accurately as possible based on collected reports. 47 confirmed German sniper kills since September 14th, Comrade General. Estimated 38 Soviet sniper lives saved based on comparison to previous casualty rates. And yes, the system scales. We need paperclips, wire, and soldiers who understand basic mechanical principles. Any factory worker or mechanic can learn it in under an hour. Chuikov made his decision immediately, the way generals do when they see tactical advantages. You're promoted to sergeant. You're assigned to my headquarters as Special Weapons Advisor. You have authorization to requisition any materials needed for this program and to train any soldiers designated by division commanders. I want every sniper in Stalingrad equipped with your system by October 1st. That's 4 days. Make it happen. Volkov started to protest that he was a factory worker, not a military trainer, but Chuikov cut him off. Comrade Sergeant Volkov, you've killed 47 German snipers with bent paperclips. I don't need military trainers. I need people who can improvise under fire. Now get to work. The training program that followed was the most intensive 4 days of Volkov's life, a blur of demonstrations and installations and technical explanations repeated hundreds of times to soldiers who ranged from eager to skeptical to openly hostile. He trained at the tractor factory ruins on September 28th, teaching 34 snipers the paperclip trigger system, while German artillery fire landed close enough to throw shrapnel through the training area. He trained at the Red October steel plant on September 29th, 47 more snipers, and lost 2 students to German air attack during the session, a Stuka that came screaming out of nowhere and dropped bombs that killed the 2 men and wounded 5 others. Volkov kept training through the attack, kept demonstrating trigger installations while medics evacuated the wounded, because Chuikov's October 1st deadline was absolute, and every hour of delay meant more Soviet snipers dying to German counterfire. On September 30th, Volkov trained 63 snipers at 3 different locations across Stalingrad's ruins, moving between positions in the back of a Gaz AA truck that somehow avoided German fire, despite traveling through areas that were supposed to be contested no man's land. The driver was a woman named Svetlana who'd been driving trucks for the Red Army since 1941, and she handled the truck like it was indestructible, racing through rubble-filled streets while Volkov held on to the seat and tried not to vomit from motion sickness and fear. Between training sessions, Volkov scrounged materials, collected 417 paperclips from destroyed offices, requisitioned 80 meters of copper wire from Signal Corps supplies, organized distribution to sniper units across the 62nd Army. By midnight on September 30th, Volkov had personally trained 144 Soviet snipers in the paperclip trigger system, supervised installation on 191 rifles, and slept a total of maybe 9 hours across 4 days. October 1st, 1942, and Volkov reported to General Chuikov at 0600 hours with status. 191 Soviet snipers equipped with paperclip triggers, another 73 triggers installed by soldiers Volkov had trained who were now training others. Total estimated coverage of 264 snipers out of approximately 400 sniper-qualified soldiers in the 62nd Army. Chuikov's response was characteristically direct. "Not good enough. We need 100% coverage. I'm giving you 3 more days and assigning you 4 assistants. Everyone gets a paperclip trigger by October 4th, or I'll have you digging latrines for the rest of the war." The threat was probably empty. Chuikov needed Volkov's skills too much. But Volkov treated it as real and pushed harder, training through October 2nd, 3rd, and 4th with a focus that bordered on obsessive. His 4 assistants were all factory workers or mechanics who understood metal and mechanical systems, and together they trained an additional 187 snipers while also establishing a maintenance program to replace damaged triggers and repair broken installations. The combat results during this period were remarkable enough that Soviet intelligence started receiving reports from German prisoners about a new Soviet sniper technique. A captured Wehrmacht soldier interrogated on October 3rd described facing Soviet snipers who could shoot without exposing themselves, fired from impossible positions, seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. German counter-sniper units reported increasing difficulty engaging Soviet shooters, complained that return fire hit empty positions, noted that Soviet sniper casualty rates had dropped dramatically. A German intelligence assessment from October 5th, later captured in 1943, included this analysis. Soviet forces in Stalingrad have implemented a new sniping technique involving remote-fired weapons. Exact mechanism unknown, but results are significant. Soviet sniper effectiveness increased estimated 140%. Soviet sniper casualties decreased estimated 60%. Recommend immediate tactical adaptation and technical analysis if opportunity arises to capture modified Soviet weapon. The opportunity came on October 7th when a Soviet sniper named Fedorov was killed by German mortar fire, and his rifle with attached paperclip trigger was recovered by Wehrmacht troops. German engineers examined the system, understood its function within hours, and began implementing countermeasures by October 9th. The countermeasures were exactly what Volkov had feared. German soldiers started shooting at suspected Soviet sniper positions even without seeing muzzle flash, used suppressive fire to prevent Soviets from recovering remotely fired rifles, occasionally captured unmanned rifles, and used them as bait for follow-up Soviet soldiers. The German adaptation reduced the paperclip trigger's effectiveness significantly. Soviet sniper casualty rates climbed back up from the historic lows of late September, and kill rates dropped as Germans became more cautious about sniper engagement. But even with German countermeasures, the paperclip triggers maintained substantial tactical advantage. Between October 9th and October 31st, 1942, Soviet snipers equipped with Volkov's system achieved 127 confirmed German sniper kills versus an estimated 34 kills during the same period in August before the system was implemented. Soviet sniper casualties dropped from an average of 2.3 deaths per week in August to 0.7 deaths per week in October, a 69% reduction. The mathematics translated directly into saved lives. Approximately 14 Soviet snipers who would have died in October survived instead. And each surviving sniper continued killing Germans, continued suppressing enemy positions, continued contributing to Stalingrad's defense. Extended across the entire period from September 14th through November 5th, the peak effectiveness period before weather and tactical changes made sniping less viable. The paperclip trigger system accounted for an estimated 127 German snipers killed and 38 Soviet snipers saved who would otherwise have died to counter sniper fire. But the larger impact came from the psychological effect on German troops who were facing an enemy that seemed to violate basic combat principles. German soldiers in Stalingrad were used to tactical superiority, better equipment, better training, better doctrine. Discovering that Soviet factory workers were defeating Wehrmacht professional snipers using bent paperclips created a morale problem that German commanders noted in after-action reports. A German officer wrote on October 19th, "The Bolsheviks fight with primitive weapons and crude tactics, yet somehow achieve results that our superior training cannot counter. Soviet snipers appear immune to our counterfire, continue operations despite our best efforts to suppress them. Troops report fear of Soviet marksmen that borders on superstition." That fear translated into hesitation, caution, reduced German combat effectiveness as soldiers became unwilling to expose themselves to Soviet sniper fire. The broader Soviet military establishment noticed Volkov's success, and in late October 1942, representatives from the main artillery directorate arrived in Stalingrad to evaluate the paperclip trigger system for potential army-wide implementation. They examined Volkov's rifles, interviewed trained snipers, reviewed combat effectiveness data, and produced a report that was simultaneously enthusiastic and condescending. The report praised the tactical innovation, but noted that the paperclip trigger was a crude field expedient unsuitable for standardized production. The main artillery directorate's recommendation was to develop a properly engineered remote firing mechanism that could be manufactured in factories and issued as standard equipment. Volkov read the report and wanted to scream. Properly engineered mechanisms would take months to design, test, manufacture, and distribute, while his paperclips could be implemented in hours using materials found in any bombed building. But military bureaucracy valued proper procedure over combat effectiveness, and by November 1942, the main artillery directorate was working on designs for an official remote trigger system that wouldn't be ready until 1943. Dmitry Volkov spent the rest of the war training Soviet soldiers in improvised weapons modifications, moving between frontline units and rear training facilities, teaching factory worker principles to combat troops who'd never seen an assembly line. He developed remote triggers for anti-tank rifles, extension mechanisms for grenade launchers, mechanical advantage systems for crew-served weapons, always working with the same principle that distance between operator and weapon improves survival rates. He was promoted to lieutenant in January 1943, assigned to the Red Army's Technical Innovation Section in March 1943, and spent the final 2 years of the war as a roving advisor who showed up at contested sectors with a toolkit and a willingness to bend anything into something useful. His official kill count remained frozen at 1, the German sniper from September 14, 1942, because after that first day, Volkov never fired a rifle in combat again. His kills came through other soldiers using systems he designed, and the Soviet military had no bureaucratic category for that kind of contribution. The war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, and Lieutenant Volkov returned to Moscow in July, age 34, with a chest full of medals, including the Order of the Red Star for technical innovation contributing to combat effectiveness, and the Order of the Patriotic War for exceptional service in defense of Stalingrad. The medals came with a pension, a small apartment in Moscow, and a job offer from Factory Number 37, which wanted him back as a senior engineer. Volkov accepted, returned to the factory floor he'd left in 1942, and spent the next 23 years designing safety systems and mechanical improvements for Soviet industrial equipment. He married in 1946, had 2 daughters, lived a quiet life that gave no indication he'd changed sniper warfare with office supplies. His wife knew he'd been decorated for something at Stalingrad, but Volkov deflected questions the way veterans do, focusing on present-day problems instead of past trauma. The paperclip trigger system was never officially adopted by the Soviet military, never standardized, never mass-produced. The main artillery directorate's properly engineered remote trigger entered limited production in 1944, was issued to approximately 230 sniper units, and was generally considered inferior to Volkov's improvised version because it was heavier, more complex, and prone to mechanical failure. Soviet snipers who'd used both systems universally preferred the paperclips. lighter, simpler, more reliable, and easily replaced if damaged. But military procurement valued standardization over effectiveness, and by 1945 the official remote trigger had replaced Volkov's improvisation in all documentation and training manuals. The paperclips became a forgotten footnote, an improvised solution from Stalingrad's desperate days that disappeared when proper military procedure reasserted itself. Dmitry Volkov died on March 17, 1968, age 57, from complications of emphysema developed after decades of factory work and cigarette smoking. His obituary in Pravda was 4 sentences long. Dmitry Volkov, senior engineer at Factory No. 37, died March 17th. He was 57. Comrade Volkov served with distinction during the Great Patriotic War and received multiple decorations for technical innovation. He is survived by his wife Irina and 2 daughters. Nothing about snipers, nothing about paperclips, nothing about the 127 German snipers killed or the 38 Soviet snipers saved. Volkov's medals went into a box at his home, his service records were filed in military archives, and for 27 years the story of the paperclip triggers remained buried in classified combat reports accessible only to Soviet military historians. The declassification came in 1995, 4 years after the Soviet Union collapsed, when Russian military archives opened portions of their Great Patriotic War records to researchers. Among those records was General Chuikov's after-action report from October 1942, describing Volkov's system in detail and crediting it with significant enhancement of Soviet sniper effectiveness during critical phase of Stalingrad defense. Military historian Dr. Alexei Markov discovered the report while researching improvised weapons development, recognized its significance, and published his findings in 1997 in a paper titled The Factory Workers' War: Improvised Innovation in the Battle of Stalingrad. The paper detailed Volkov's background, explained the mechanics of the paperclip trigger, and calculated the tactical impact. 127 German snipers killed, 38 Soviet snipers saved, and an estimated 8,900 Soviet soldiers who survived Stalingrad because German snipers were suppressed or eliminated by Volkov's system. That 8,900 number came from extensive analysis of German and Soviet casualty records. Dr. Markov calculated that each German sniper in Stalingrad averaged 1.7 Soviet soldier kills per week during the August-September 1942 period before the paperclip triggers appeared. The 127 German snipers killed by Soviet marksmen using Volkov's system would have continued operating through November 1942 if not eliminated, an average of 8 additional weeks per sniper, resulting in approximately 1,828 Soviet casualties that didn't occur. But the larger impact came from suppression effect. German snipers who weren't killed became more cautious, took fewer shots, achieved lower kill rates because they were afraid of Soviet counterfire. Dr. Markov estimated this suppression effect reduced German sniper effectiveness by roughly 43% across the Stalingrad front, resulting in approximately 7,200 Soviet soldiers who survived encounters they would have died in without the suppression. Combined with the direct kills and saved Soviet snipers, the total impact reached 8,900 Soviet lives preserved through Volkov's innovation. The Russian Federation issued a formal recognition in 2000, 58 years after Stalingrad, posthumously awarding Volkov the title Hero of the Russian Federation for exceptional technical innovation contributing to Soviet victory in the Great Patriotic War. Irina Volkova, Dmitry's widow, accepted the honor at age 86 during a ceremony at the Stalingrad Battle Museum, accompanied by her daughters and 12 grandchildren who'd never known their grandfather had done anything particularly noteworthy during the war. The museum created a permanent exhibition about the paperclip trigger system, displaying one of Volkov's actual modified rifles, recovered from a museum storage facility where it had sat since 1946, incorrectly catalogued as damaged sniper rifle, origin unknown, alongside documents, photographs, and testimonials from surviving Soviet snipers who'd used the system. The exhibition text includes this assessment from Dr. Markov. Volkov's paperclip trigger represents one of the most effective examples of improvised military innovation in modern warfare, demonstrating that tactical advantages often come not from superior technology, but from creative application of basic mechanical principles. Modern sniper doctrine incorporates the distance principle that Volkov discovered in 1942. Special forces worldwide use remote firing systems for observation posts and unmanned weapon stations, employing sophisticated electronics and servo motors to achieve what Volkov achieved with bent wire and copper cable. U.S. military sniper courses teach a case study about Stalingrad's paperclip triggers as an example of asymmetric innovation, the principle that disadvantaged forces can achieve tactical parity through creative improvisation. The lesson isn't use paperclips against enemy snipers. Modern warfare has evolved beyond such crude expedients, but rather understand your equipment well enough to modify it for tactical advantage using available materials. It's a lesson that applies equally to factory workers in 1934 Moscow and combat soldiers in any modern conflict. Factory number 37 closed in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed and state-owned industries privatized or failed. The building was demolished in 1998. Nothing remains except a historical marker noting that the site once produced automobiles and employed over 5,000 workers during peak production years. Volkov's name isn't on the marker. His grave at Vagankovo Cemetery in Moscow is a simple headstone with dates and family information, no mention of Stalingrad or hero of the Russian Federation. But in the archives of the Stalingrad Battle Museum, in declassified Soviet military reports from 1942, in the survival of 8,900 Soviet soldiers and their descendants. In all those places, Dmitry Volkov's legacy endures. The factory worker who understood that tools extend human capability, who saw a problem that generals couldn't solve, who fixed it with 1.2 ounces of bent steel and saved an army in the process. The Stalingrad Battle Museum still displays Volkov's rifle with its attached paperclip trigger, preserved in a climate-controlled case that prevents further corrosion of the 60-year-old wire. Over 200,000 visitors per year examine the exhibit, most of them Russian tourists and military history enthusiasts. And the most common reaction is disbelief. This crude piece of bent metal changed one of history's most important battles? Museum guides explain patiently that innovation isn't about sophisticated technology. It's about recognizing problems and solving them with whatever resources exist, whether those resources are advanced electronics or office supplies scrounged from bombed buildings. The paperclip sits in its case, a tiny curl of oxidized steel wire, and proves that sometimes the most important weapons aren't designed in laboratories or manufactured in defense plants. Sometimes they're bent by hand in the darkness while enemy soldiers hunt above you, shaped by 8 years of factory experience and pure desperate ingenuity, tested under fire when there's no time for proper procedure and no choice except improvise or die.